On January 21, 1968, workers began drilling into the foundations of what had once been the tallest building on Earth. The Singer Building, a 47-story monument to ambition, had stood for just 60 years. It remains to this day the tallest structure ever voluntarily destroyed. What killed it was not age or decay, or even obsolescence in the traditional sense. What killed it was the same ruthless mathematics that had created it, the obsession with height above all else. The tower that rose 612 feet to claim a world record had been built on a floor plan so slender, so impractical, that it could never earn enough money to justify its own existence. Chapter 1. When being second was unthinkable. In 1902, the Singer Manufacturing Company was printing money faster than it could count, yet its president could not sleep. Frederick Bourne had built an empire that touched every corner of the civilized world. Singer sewing machines sat in parlors from Paris to Peking. The company's global sales network employed 14,000 people across 60 countries. Annual revenues exceeded $13 million, a figure that placed Singer among the most profitable corporations in America. Bourne himself earned a salary of $100,000 per year, equivalent to roughly $3 million in modern currency. He had everything except the one thing that mattered in turn-of-the-century Manhattan: a building that commanded the skyline. The company's headquarters occupied a modest 10-story structure on Broadway, a building so unremarkable that pedestrians walked past without noticing. While Singer machines dominated global markets, the company remained architecturally invisible in the city where perception was reality. Every day, Bourne looked out his office window at the growing forest of skyscrapers and understood a fundamental truth about corporate power in the new century. If you could not be seen, you did not exist. The city was in the middle of a height war. The Park Row building had claimed the title of world's tallest in 1899 at 386 feet. Then came the Philadelphia City Hall Tower, the St. Paul Building, each one straining higher, and each corporation desperate to plant its flag at the apex of the skyline. Height had become the ultimate corporate advertisement, a vertical billboard announcing dominance to everyone who looked up. Then in 1902, the announcement came that changed everything. Metropolitan Life Insurance Company revealed plans for a tower that would soar 700 feet above Madison Square Park. Metropolitan Life, the company whose business was calculating risk and selling security, it would soon occupy the tallest building in the world. The competitor would become the monument. For Bourne, this was intolerable. The decision came swiftly. Singer would build higher. The company would commission a tower so dramatic, so impossible to ignore, that it would redefine what corporate architecture could be. Money was no object. Practicality was negotiable. The only requirement was supremacy. But Singer's existing site presented a problem that money could not easily solve. The lot measured just 65 feet wide by 95 feet deep, a narrow sliver of Manhattan real estate hemmed in by neighboring buildings. Most architects would have declared the site impossible for a record-breaking tower. The mathematics of structural engineering demanded a certain width-to-height ratio. Build too tall on too small a base, and the building would topple in high winds or buckle under its own weight. Bourne needed an architect willing to promise the impossible. He found one in Ernest Flagg. Chapter 2. The Architect Who Promised the Impossible. Ernest Flagg had built mansions for Vanderbilts, but what the Singer Company demanded was something closer to a cathedral made of steel. Flagg was 50 years old when Singer approached him, already established as one of New York's premier architects. His portfolio included the Scribner Building, the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, and palatial estates for America's wealthiest families. He understood how to translate money into architectural prestige. More importantly, he understood how to manipulate perception through proportion and ornament. The problem he faced was brutally simple. The site was too small. A conventional skyscraper design, with uniform floors rising straight to the roof, would never achieve the height Bourne demanded without violating every principle of structural stability. The building would look squat, inelegant, and as like a thick column rather than a soaring tower. Flagg's solution was radical. Divide the building into parts, each with its own purpose and proportion. The base would be massive and wide, a 14-story commercial building that filled the entire lot and extended into an L-shaped wing along adjacent streets. This portion would house retail spaces, commercial offices, and the structural foundation needed to support what came next. It would be profitable, practical, not architecturally conventional. Then, rising from the center of this base would come the tower itself. Flagg designed the tower as a slender shaft measuring just 65 feet by 95 feet in plane, identical to the original lot dimensions. It would rise 41 additional stories above the base, crowned by a mansard roof that added another 12 stories of tapered, copper-clad elegance. The total height would reach 612 feet, a tall enough to claim the world record with margin to spare. The design was a feat of architectural sleight of hand. By separating the commercial base from the symbolic tower, Flagg could achieve dramatic height without the building appearing top-heavy or unstable. The tower would read as a delicate needle piercing the sky, an impossible vertical gesture that defied gravity itself. But this elegance came with a cost that would only become clear decades later. The tower floors, those 41 stories of slender floor plan, would each contain just 6,175 square feet of rentable space. A typical office building of the era offered floors of 15 to 20,000 square feet. Flagg had sacrificed more than half the potential floor area in exchange for the appearance of impossible height. He presented the design to Bourne in 1906. The drawings showed a building of extraordinary beauty, its Beaux-Arts facade layered with classical ornament, arched windows, terracotta decoration, and that magnificent mansard roof that would glow copper green against the sky. The tower would be unmistakable from miles away, a corporate signature written across the Manhattan skyline. Bourne approved the design immediately. The estimated cost was $1.5 million, roughly $45 million in current terms. Construction contracts were signed, steel orders were placed. Ground broke in 1906. What neither Flagg nor Bourne fully grasped was that they had just designed a building whose fundamental geometry guaranteed its eventual destruction. The tower they were creating would be too narrow to ever function efficiently as an office building, too expensive to maintain, too rigid in its layout to adapt to changing workplace needs. It was a monument first and a functional structure second. The fatal flaw was present in the first drawings. It was there in every calculation, every beam specification, every floor plan. They were building a building that could never pay for itself. But in 1906, with steel rising and newspapers already covering the construction, none of that mattered. They were going to build the tallest building on Earth. The rest was someone else's problem. Chapter 3. the day they touched the sky. When the Singer Building opened on May 9, 1908, it stood 612 feet tall. And for exactly 1 year, nothing on Earth rose higher. The opening ceremony drew thousands. Crowds packed Broadway from curb to curb, necks craned upward, trying to comprehend the sheer verticality of what Flagg had created. The building did not simply rise, it soared, its slender proportions creating an optical illusion that made it appear even taller than its actual height. The copper mansard roof caught the morning light and seemed to float above the city, a crown suspended in air. Frederick Bourne stood in his executive office on the 41st floor and surveyed an empire made visible. From this height, he could see the East River, the Hudson, the patchwork grid of Manhattan spreading in every direction. He was, quite literally, standing at the highest occupied point on the planet. The newspapers declared it a marvel of engineering. The New York Times devoted an entire page to technical specifications. 14,000 tons of structural steel, the 2.5 million bricks, 885 windows, 12 elevators capable of traveling 700 feet per minute. The building contained its own power plant, its own water system, its own pneumatic tube network for internal mail delivery. It was a self-contained vertical city. The executive floors were designed to demonstrate that height and luxury were not mutually exclusive. Bourne's personal office occupied nearly the entire 41st floor. It finished with mahogany paneling, marble fireplaces, and custom furniture that had cost more than most Americans earned in a lifetime. The floor below housed the company's boardroom, a space so ornate it resembled a European palace chamber more than a corporate meeting room. For visiting clients and dignitaries, the building offered an experience unlike anything else in the world. The elevator ride itself became a spectacle. Passengers stepped into wood-paneled cars with brass fixtures and uniformed operators who announced each floor like train conductors. The ascent took 90 seconds. 90 seconds of feeling the city fall away beneath you as you rose into the clouds. The view from the observation deck, located just below the mansard roof, was transformative. Visitors stood at a height where weather happened below them. On clear days, you could see 50 miles in every direction. On foggy mornings, the tower rose above the cloud layer into brilliant sunshine while the city remained shrouded below. The Singer Building occupied a realm between earth and sky, between the mortal city and something approaching the celestial. The global press coverage was everything Bourne had hoped for. Newspapers in London, Paris, Berlin, Tokyo ran photographs of the completed tower. The Singer name, already known worldwide through its products, now had an architectural icon to match. The building became shorthand for American industrial might, for New York's seemingly limitless ambition, for the idea that any dream, no matter how vertical, could be realized through money and engineering. Singer stock prices climbed. Annual reports prominently featured photographs of the tower. The building appeared on company letterhead, in advertisements, on product packaging. It had achieved exactly what Bourne intended. The architecture had become the brand. What nobody mentioned, what perhaps nobody yet understood, was that the building was already failing at its secondary purpose. Those narrow tower floors, designed for glory rather than function, were proving difficult to lease. The rental income projections in the original business plan assumed full occupancy at premium rates. By the end of 1908, 6 months after opening, nearly 30% of the tower floors remained vacant. But this was easy to ignore. The building was the tallest in the world. It was beautiful beyond measure. It had transformed Singer's public image overnight. The numbers would sort themselves out eventually. Bourne believed this completely. Standing in his palace in the sky, watching the city spread beneath him like a map of his dominion, how could he believe anything else? The Singer building had touched the sky. For exactly 365 days, it would remain there, unmatched and unchallenged. Then metropolitan life finished their tower. Chapter 4. The floor plan that could not pay its bills. Inside the world's tallest building, something strange was happening. Entire floors sat empty because no tenant could make the numbers work. The problem was not location. Broadway and Liberty Street was premium Manhattan real estate, the heart of the financial district, surrounded by banks, investment houses, and corporate headquarters. Demand for office space was intense. Buildings nearby commanded rental rates of $3 to $4 per square foot annually, and they were fully leased. The problem was geometry. A typical Singer Tower floor measured 65 feet by 95 feet, yielding 6,175 square feet of space. But that space was not usable in the way modern businesses needed. The floor plan was a narrow rectangle, awkward to subdivide, difficult to light naturally, impossible to configure for the large open offices that corporations increasingly preferred. Compare this to contemporary competitors. The Park Row building offered floor plates of 12,000 square feet. The Flatiron building, despite its famously acute angle, still provided 9,000 square feet per floor. The new Woolworth building, under construction downtown, would deliver floors exceeding 20,000 square feet. The difference was not merely size, it was efficiency. A 20,000 square foot floor could house 100 employees in a coherent workspace, with room for file storage, meeting areas, and natural light reaching every desk. A 6,000 square foot floor in the Singer Tower could accommodate perhaps 30 employees in cramped, segmented offices that felt more like railroad apartments than modern workspaces. The rental mathematics were devastating. Assume a corporation needed space for 100 employees. In the Woolworth building, they could lease one floor for 20,000 square feet at $4 per square foot, an annual cost of $80,000. In the Singer building, they would need to lease 4 separate floors, totaling 24,600 square feet. Even at a discounted rate of $3 per square foot, the annual cost exceeded $73,000. And that assumed the 4 floors were contiguous, which they rarely were. A tenant might occupy floors 20, in 23, 26, and 30, requiring separate elevator trips, separate reception areas, fragmented communication, and the psychological burden of a workforce scattered across vertical space. Corporate tenants looked at the Singer Tower and saw inefficiency priced at a premium. They went elsewhere. By 1910, the building's occupancy rate hovered around 65%. The tower floors, the portion of the building that existed purely for prestige, were the weakest performers. The commercial base, those first 14 stories with their wider, more practical floor plates, remained mostly full. But the iconic tower, the part that had cost the most and generated the publicity, was becoming a financial liability. The Singer Company absorbed the losses without public acknowledgement. As the building's primary tenant, occupying multiple floors for its own operations, the company could disguise the true vacancy rate. Annual reports mentioned the building only in passing, noting its architectural significance without discussing rental income. But internal accounting told a darker story. The building's operating costs ran approximately $400,000 annually. This included staff salaries for elevator operators, maintenance workers, and building managers, plus utilities, insurance, property taxes, and ongoing repairs. To break even, the building needed to generate the same amount in rental income. At an average rate of $3 per square foot, this required leasing 133,000 square feet of the building's total 350,000 square feet. The base floors provided about 90,000 square feet. The tower needed to deliver the remaining 43,000, which meant leasing roughly half of its 84 tower floors. In good years, they came close. In recession years, occupancy dropped below 50%, and the building operated at a loss. Frederick Bourne died in 1920, never seeing his monument become profitable. His successors inherited a building that was world famous and financially troubled, a symbol of corporate ambition that required constant subsidy to maintain. The fundamental problem was immutable. The floor plan could not be changed. The building's slender proportions, its defining architectural feature, were also its economic curse. No amount of renovation could add width to floors constrained by the original structural frame. The building was locked into its geometry forever. And every year, newer buildings opened with better floor plans, lower operating costs, and modern amenities the Singer Tower could not match. The competition was not standing still. The city was building upward and outward simultaneously, on creating office space at a rate that made individual buildings increasingly disposable. The Singer Building had won the height race, but height, it turned out, was the least important metric in determining whether a skyscraper could survive. Chapter 5. When the record stopped mattering. By 1913, 5 years after its completion, the Singer Building was not even among the 10 tallest buildings in Manhattan anymore. The title of world's tallest building transferred to Metropolitan Life Tower in 1909, just 12 months after Singer's opening. At 700 feet, MetLife exceeded Singer by 88 feet. Bourne's dream of permanent supremacy had lasted 1 year. Then the race accelerated beyond anything architects had imagined possible. The Woolworth Building opened in 1913 at 792 feet, nearly 200 feet taller than Singer. Frank Woolworth had studied Singer's mistakes carefully. His tower offered massive floor plates, advanced elevator systems, and a structural design that balanced prestige with profit. It was both taller and more efficient, proving that height and function need not be mutually exclusive. The Manhattan Company Building followed in 1930 at 927 feet. The Chrysler Building briefly claimed the record in 1930 at 1,046 feet, only to lose it to the Empire State Building in 1931 at 1,250 feet. By the mid-1930s, the Singer Building had fallen from first place to 16th. By the 1950s, it was not ranked at all. New towers rose every year, each one taller, wider, more advanced than anything the Edwardian era could have conceived. The speed of obsolescence was breathtaking. In 1908, the Singer Building had been a technological marvel, the ultimate expression of what steel frame construction could achieve. By 1920, it was merely old. By 1940, it was ancient. The building watched its own irrelevance unfold floor by floor, decade by decade. The copper mansard roof that had once gleamed as the city's crown now sat in shadow, dwarfed by towers that rose twice its height. The observation deck closed in 1923 when the Woolworth Building's platform offered superior views from greater altitude. The building's identity as a tourist destination evaporated. What remained was a simple question of utility. Could the building function as what it had always been beneath the publicity? An office tower generating rental income? The answer grew more complicated with each passing year. The 1920s brought new expectations for workplace design. Corporations wanted open floor plans that fostered collaboration. They wanted windows that opened in natural light, penetrating deep into work areas, spaces that felt modern rather than Victorian. The Singer Tower could provide none of this. Its floors were too narrow for open plans. Its windows were fixed, part of an era before air conditioning when natural ventilation was unnecessary. Its interior layouts reflected Edwardian assumptions about work: small private offices, dark corridors, segmented spaces that isolated rather than connected. The building had been designed in 1906. By 1930, workplace culture had evolved beyond recognition. The structure could not evolve with it. Then came the Depression. Between 1929 and 1933, Manhattan office vacancy rates exceeded 30%. Buildings competed desperately for tenants, slashing rents, offering free months, absorbing costs they could not afford. The Singer Building, already struggling with occupancy, saw rates drop below 50%. Some floors sat empty for years, a darkness behind windows, dust accumulating in offices, the slow decay of abandonment. The Singer Company maintained the building, paid the taxes, covered the operating costs, because selling was impossible and demolition was unthinkable. You did not tear down an architectural landmark. You endured. World War II brought temporary relief. Government agencies needed space. Defense contractors expanded, and Manhattan's office market tightened. The Singer Building filled again, and not because it was desirable, but because everything was needed. The moment the war ended, the problems returned. The post-war era introduced new standards that made the Singer Tower not merely outdated, but actively problematic. Air conditioning became expected, not optional. The Singer Building's fixed windows and narrow floor plates made efficient climate control nearly impossible. Open floor plans became universal. The Singer Tower's load-bearing interior walls prevented layout flexibility, and underground parking became standard amenity. The Singer Building had no parking and no space to add it. Most devastating was the shift in how corporations valued real estate. In Bourne's era, a headquarters building was a monument, a symbol, an advertisement worth any cost. By the 1950s, corporate real estate had become a pure balance sheet calculation. Buildings were assets that generated measurable returns or liabilities that consumed capital. The Singer Building's narrow floors, high operating costs, and inflexible layout placed it firmly in the liability column. Every quarterly review, every budget analysis, every long-term planning session reached the same conclusion. The building was costing more than it earned and would never reverse that equation. The question was no longer whether the building would survive. The question was when someone would finally admit it could not. Chapter 6. The calculation. No one could escape. The Singer Company's accountants had begun asking a question that would have been unthinkable 15 years earlier. Is this building worth keeping? The year was 1960. The Singer Manufacturing Company had transformed since Bourne's death, evolving from a sewing machine manufacturer into a diversified industrial conglomerate. New management brought new priorities. Sentiment about historic buildings did not appear on the balance sheet. The accounting department prepared a comprehensive analysis of the Broadway headquarters. The numbers were damning. Annual operating costs had climbed to $650,000. This included property taxes of $190,000, utilities averaging $45,000, maintenance and repairs at $90,000, staff salaries totaling $220,000, insurance at $35,000, and miscellaneous expenses of $60,000. Every year, the building consumed over $500,000 just to keep the lights on. Rental income from external tenants generated approximately $400,000 annually at current occupancy rates. The Singer Company's internal departments occupied roughly 40% of the building, space that could theoretically be rented to outside tenants at market rates, but currently generated no income. The arithmetic was simple. The building lost money. More troubling was the trend line. Office space in Lower Manhattan was changing rapidly. New construction favored enormous floor plates in buildings sheathed entirely in glass. The Lever House, completed in 1952, had introduced a new aesthetic of corporate modernism. Clean lines, transparent facades, column-free interiors, central air conditioning, underground parking. This was the future. The Singer Building, with its ornate Beaux-Arts decoration and compartmentalized Victorian interiors, belonged to a past that corporations actively wanted to escape. Modern businesses did not want offices that looked like French palaces. They wanted spaces that looked like efficient machines. Rental rates in the Singer Tower reflected this perception. While new buildings commanded $5 to $6 per square foot, Singer struggled to attract tenants above $3. The building's prestige, its history, and its architectural significance added no value in a market that measured only functionality. The real estate market was delivering another message. The land beneath the building was worth far more than the structure standing on it. The lot occupied roughly half an acre in the heart of the financial district, steps from Wall Street, surrounded by the highest property values in the city. A modern office tower on this site could deliver 3 times the rentable square footage, to command premium rents and generate returns that would justify construction costs within 15 years. The Singer Building, by contrast, generated returns that barely covered debt service on money borrowed decades earlier. The structure had negative value. It was an obstacle preventing the land from reaching its highest economic use. Corporate real estate advisors began suggesting what would have been heretical in Bourne's time. The building should be demolished. Initial reactions ranged from shock to dismissal. You did not tear down the Singer Building. It was a landmark, an icon, a structure that had defined the New York skyline for half a century. The public relations disaster alone would be catastrophic, but the advisors pressed their case with cold logic. The building was 52 years old. Its structural systems were aging. Elevator machinery needed replacement. Plumbing and electrical systems were obsolete. Climate control was inadequate. The building would require millions in capital improvements just to remain competitive. And those improvements could not change the fundamental flaw: floors that were too small. Every dollar invested in renovation was a dollar wasted on a structure that could never generate market rate returns. The question shifted from whether to demolish to when and how. But first, someone needed to want the land badly enough to make an offer that justified the destruction of an architectural monument. That someone appeared in 1961. United States Steel Corporation had been searching for a site to build its own headquarters tower, a structure that would demonstrate American industrial might through modern design. They wanted Lower Manhattan. They wanted proximity to Wall Street. They wanted a location that announced dominance. They wanted the Singer Building's land. The offer would change everything. Chapter 7. The offer that valued beauty at zero. In 1961, a United States Steel made a proposal so stark it revealed exactly what 50 years of glory was actually worth. The offer was $12 million for the land, not the land with the building, just the land. The Singer Building itself was assigned no value. In the cold mathematics of the transaction, the structure that had once been the tallest in the world was worth exactly the same as the cost of its removal: nothing. United States Steel's proposal was contingent on demolition. They would not purchase the property unless Singer agreed to clear the site completely. The company wanted empty land, scraped to bedrock, ready for new construction. The existing building was garbage to be hauled away. For Singer's board of directors, the offer forced a decision that had been deferred for years. Accept the deal and destroy an architectural icon that bore the company's name, or decline and continue subsidizing a building that lost money with mathematical certainty. The financial analysis was conducted with brutal honesty. Singer commissioned independent appraisals of the property. 3 separate firms reached the same conclusion. The land was worth between $10 and $14 million vacant. With the building in place, the property was worth approximately $8 million, the cost of acquiring an income-producing but underperforming asset. The building subtracted value from the land. This was the central truth that made demolition inevitable. Singer's leadership examined alternatives. Could the building be renovated into profitability? Engineering studies suggested that modernizing the mechanical systems, replacing elevators, installing central air conditioning, and updating the facade would cost approximately $8 million. Even after this investment, the narrow floor plates would remain, and rental income would still trail operating costs. Could the building be converted to another use? Hotels required different floor layouts. Residential conversion was theoretically possible, but would require gutting the interior and rebuilding within the existing frame, an approach that saved only the facade while destroying everything behind it. The costs exceeded new construction. Could the building be sold to someone else who valued its history? Real estate brokers approached museums, preservation organizations, and private collectors. No one wanted a 53-year-old office tower with negative cash flow. Historic significance could not pay property taxes. The board meeting that sealed the building's fate lasted 3 hours. The vote was not unanimous, but opposition crumbled under the weight of evidence. Keeping the building meant losing money every year until either the company went bankrupt or future management made the same decision. Selling meant accepting reality. Architecture built for glory had no place in a world that measured success in profit per square foot. Singer accepted United States Steel's offer in November 1961. The sale contract included specific provisions. Singer would vacate the building within 18 months. United States Steel would assume ownership on a specified date, and demolition would begin immediately upon transfer. The announcement generated surprisingly little controversy. The New York Times ran a brief article on page 23. Architectural journals published obituaries that acknowledged the building's historical significance, but accepted its destruction as inevitable. A few preservation advocates wrote letters, but the landmark's preservation movement was still forming, still learning how to mobilize public opinion, still years away from having legal authority to prevent demolition. In 1961, And the prevailing attitude toward old buildings was simple. They were old. Modern was better. Progress meant replacement. The past was something to overcome, not preserve. United States Steel announced plans for the replacement structure, a 54-story tower called One Liberty Plaza, designed in the international style with floor plates exceeding 28,000 square feet. The building would contain 2.3 million square feet of rentable space, more than 6 times what the Singer Building offered. Projected rental income exceeded $4 million annually. The mathematics told a story of absolute clarity. One Liberty Plaza would succeed where the Singer Building had failed because it was designed for profit rather than glory. The demolition contract was awarded to a firm called Galvin Brothers in December 1962. The estimated timeline was 30 months. The estimated cost was $4.5 million, more than 3 times what the original construction had cost in 1908. It would take longer to destroy the Singer Building than it had taken to build it. This fact appeared in several articles, usually as an ironic footnote, rarely with the gravity it deserved. The building that had risen to touch the sky in 3 years would require nearly 3 years to return to Earth. Destruction demanded precision equal to creation, care equal to ambition. Before the wrecking equipment arrived, something unexpected happened. People who had ignored the building for decades suddenly wanted to see it one last time. Chapter 8. When preservation was still a foreign word. In 1967, exactly one person in New York City had the legal power to stop the demolition, and he chose not to use it. Jeffrey Platt served as chairman of the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, an agency created just 2 years earlier in direct response to the destruction of Pennsylvania Station. Penn Station's demolition in 1963 had shocked the city into recognizing that architectural heritage could vanish overnight without legal protection. The Landmarks Law of 1965 gave the Commission authority to designate buildings as protected landmarks, preventing demolition without public hearing and approval. The Singer Building was exactly the type of structure the law was designed to protect. Architecturally significant, historically important, irreplaceable. Platt received letters from architects, historians, and citizens urging landmark designation. Some pointed out that the building had once been the tallest in the world. Others emphasized Ernest Flagg's architectural brilliance. A few argued that destroying the Singer Building would establish a precedent that no structure, regardless of significance, was safe from the economics of real estate. Platt faced a dilemma that would define preservation politics for the next half-century. The Landmarks Law was new, untested, vulnerable to legal challenge. Designating the Singer Building as a landmark would trigger a lawsuit from United States Steel, a corporation with unlimited legal resources and powerful political connections. The case would almost certainly reach the courts, where the constitutionality of the Landmarks Law itself might be questioned. If the Commission lost, the entire preservation framework could collapse. Every landmark designation could be invalidated. The tool created to protect historic buildings might be destroyed before it could save anything. Platt made a calculated decision. He would not designate the Singer Building. The fight was unwinnable. The timing was wrong. And preservation resources needed to focus on buildings where public support was stronger and legal standing was clearer. The decision was announced without fanfare in March 1967. The Landmarks Preservation Commission declined to consider the Singer Building for designation. No public hearing was held. No formal vote was recorded. The building's fate was sealed by bureaucratic inaction. A small coalition of architects and preservationists formed an emergency committee to oppose demolition through other means. They had no legal authority, no political power, and no funding. What they had was passion and the growing sense that something irreversible and tragic was about to occur. The committee organized a letter-writing campaign. They contacted newspapers, architectural journals, and professional organizations. They argued that the Singer Building represented a crucial moment in skyscraper history, that its Beaux-Arts design was superior to the sterile modernism that would replace it, that once destroyed, nothing like it could ever be built again. The response was polite indifference. The New York Times published one editorial expressing mild regret, but accepting demolition as necessary for progress. Architectural magazines ran retrospective articles celebrating Flagg's design while acknowledging its economic failure. Professional organizations passed resolutions deploring the loss, but took no action to prevent it. The preservationists faced a cultural barrier more formidable than any legal obstacle. In 1967, most Americans simply did not believe old buildings were worth saving. Historic preservation was a fringe interest, associated with colonial houses and Civil War battlefields, not commercial office towers from the Edwardian era. The prevailing logic was brutal in its clarity. If a building could not pay its own way, it deserved to die. Preservation was perceived as sentimentality, obstructing economic progress. Nostalgia was a luxury the city could not afford. United States Steel responded to preservation objections with a public relations strategy that framed demolition as civic improvement. Company statements emphasized job creation. The new building would employ thousands during construction and provide modern office space for tens of thousands of workers. Preserving an obsolete structure would deny the city economic growth. This argument resonated with politicians, business leaders, and editorial boards. The late 1960s were years of urban crisis. New York was losing corporate headquarters to suburbs, losing tax revenue to surrounding states, yet losing its competitive edge to younger cities with modern infrastructure. Blocking development to save a 59-year-old building seemed counterproductive. The Preservation Committee's final effort was a proposal to save just the facade. Engineers studied whether the Singer Building's exterior could be preserved while constructing a new building behind it. The conclusion was discouraging. The structural frame and facade were integrated in ways that made separation prohibitively expensive. Facade preservation would cost nearly as much as full preservation, and United States Steel had zero interest in either. By June 1967, organized opposition had collapsed. The Preservation Committee dissolved. Letters to newspapers stopped. The architectural community moved on to fighting other battles. The Singer Building stood alone, scheduled for execution, abandoned by everyone who might have saved it. The wrecking equipment was scheduled to arrive in January 1968. Journalists who covered the demolition's final approval noted an odd phenomenon. People who had never visited the Singer Building began appearing at its base, looking up, taking photographs, touching the limestone facade as if saying goodbye. Tour guides added the building to their routes, framing it as a last chance to see something about to vanish. The building that had been ignored for decades was suddenly visible again, but only because it was dying. Chapter 9. The 30 months it took to erase history. Destroying the world's tallest building required more engineering precision than building it had, and infinitely more sadness from those who watched it die. Demolition began January 21, 1968, in the basement. Crews started 6 stories below street level, attacking the foundation first. It's severing connections to the bedrock that had anchored the building for 60 years. The strategy was methodical. Work from bottom to top, dismantling structural supports in carefully calculated sequence to prevent collapse. Traditional wrecking ball demolition was impossible. The Singer building stood too close to neighboring structures, shared too many walls, integrated too deeply into the surrounding urban fabric. Bringing it down required surgical precision, removing the building piece by piece, floor by floor, in controlled operations that protected adjacent properties. The process resembled reverse construction. Workers stripped interior finishes first, removing furniture, carpet, light fixtures, plumbing, electrical wiring, anything salvageable or recyclable. Then came the walls, both partition and structural, reduced to rubble with jackhammers and saws. Finally, the steel frame itself, cut into sections with acetylene torches, lowered to street level by crane, trucked away for scrap. Each floor took approximately 3 weeks to clear. The building contained 47 floors above ground. Simple arithmetic suggested the entire demolition would require 3 years. Contractors accelerated the timeline by working multiple floors simultaneously, employing crews around the clock in 3 8-hour shifts. The noise was relentless. Jackhammers echoed through the financial district from 6 in the morning until midnight, 6 days a week. Dust clouds rose from the demolition site, coating nearby buildings in a fine gray powder that tasted of concrete and metal. Trucks hauled debris through narrow streets, creating traffic jams that paralyzed Lower Manhattan for blocks in every direction. Neighbors complained. Workers wore respirators against the dust. Pedestrians crossed the street to avoid falling debris. The building's death was loud, dirty, disruptive, impossible to ignore. Architectural salvage dealers purchased elements considered valuable: marble fireplaces, brass elevator doors, decorative ironwork, light fixtures, anything with resale potential to collectors or renovation projects. The copper mansard roof, weighing several tons and containing metal worth thousands, was carefully removed and sold to a scrap dealer. Much of the building simply went to landfills. Terracotta ornaments that had taken artisans months to create were smashed into anonymous rubble. Carved limestone blocks became fill dirt. The mahogany paneling from executive offices burned in industrial furnaces. Photographers documented the demolition with a reverence usually reserved for historical monuments. Their images captured the building in stages of destruction, floors disappearing one at a time, the tower shrinking week by week, and the distinctive silhouette gradually erased from the skyline. One photograph, taken in July 1969, shows the building reduced to approximately half its original height. The copper roof is gone. The upper tower floors have vanished. What remains looks wounded, unfinished, like a building abandoned mid-construction rather than one being systematically destroyed. The image is devastating because it shows the Singer building as neither complete nor gone, but trapped in a state of active dying. Workers reported strange emotional responses to the job. Demolition was standard construction work, but destroying the Singer building felt different. Several crews requested transfers to other projects. Union stewards noted higher than normal absenteeism. Psychologists would later suggest that participating in the destruction of something beautiful, even as paid labor, created moral distress that workers struggled to articulate. By October 1969, the tower was gone entirely. Only the base remained, that 14-story commercial structure that had been the building's foundation. Crews worked through the winter, finally reaching ground level in March 1970. The last structural element removed was a section of the original bedrock foundation, blasted free on March 19, 1970. The site stood empty for the first time in 62 years. Workers who had spent 30 months tearing the building down reported feeling relieved when it was finally over. The total cost of demolition exceeded $5 million, making it the most expensive building removal in New York history to that date. The debris filled hundreds of trucks. The salvaged steel was melted down and recycled into new construction, becoming anonymous structural elements in buildings across the country. Nothing visible remained. United States Steel took possession of a vacant lot measuring 65 feet by 95 feet, scraped clean to bedrock, ready for new construction. The Singer Building was gone. What it left behind was absence, photographs, memories, and the growing understanding that something irreplaceable had been lost not to time or disaster, but to deliberate choice. Chapter 10. The Tower That Learned Nothing from the Past. One Liberty Plaza, the building that replaced the Singer Tower, is taller and wider and vastly more profitable, yet no one has ever loved it. Construction began in 1970, immediately after the demolition site was cleared. The architectural firm of Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill designed a tower that represented everything the Singer Building was not: efficient, modern, deliberately anti-ornamental. One Liberty Plaza rose 54 stories, reaching 704 feet, nearly 100 feet taller than the Singer Building. But height was incidental to its true purpose. The building's defining characteristic was its floor plates, 28,000 square feet per floor, more than 4 times what the Singer Tower had offered. The total rentable area exceeded 2.3 million square feet. Where the Singer Building had struggled to generate $400,000 in annual rental income, One Liberty Plaza projected returns of $4 million. The building would achieve full occupancy within 2 years of opening and maintain it for decades. The design followed the international style that dominated corporate architecture in the 1970s. A steel and glass box with no decorative elements, no historical references, no concessions to beauty beyond the purity of geometric form. The facade was a grid of identical windows, 54 stories of repetition, stating through its very monotony that function had triumphed over ornament. Critics called it soulless. Architectural historians labeled it generic. Pedestrians walked past without looking up. The building was aggressively unremarkable, designed to be invisible despite its size. This was intentional. The architects had studied the Singer Building's failure and concluded that corporate clients wanted buildings that served as neutral containers for work, not monuments to ego. One Liberty Plaza did not demand attention. It provided space, efficiently, profitably, without the burden of history or the cost of maintenance that ornamental facades required. The building opened in 1973, 5 years after demolition began. Initial tenants included Merrill Lynch, which leased 12 floors, and various financial firms that valued proximity to Wall Street above architectural character. Rental rates averaged $6 per square foot, and triple what the Singer Building had commanded. By every financial metric, One Liberty Plaza succeeded. It generated returns that justified construction costs within the projected timeline. It remained competitive as office needs evolved. It adapted to new technologies, new workplace configurations, new tenant demands. The building worked, but something was missing: One Liberty Plaza had no identity beyond its address. No one photographed it for postcards or architectural journals. No visitors came to see it. The building existed in the skyline without contributing to it, occupying space without creating place. The comparison was inevitable and damning. The Singer Building had been beautiful and unprofitable. One Liberty Plaza was ugly and successful. The question that haunted architectural discourse for the next 50 years was whether this trade was inevitable or whether someone, somewhere, could design buildings that achieved both. Standing at the base of One Liberty Plaza and looking up, you saw nothing that stirred emotion. The building did not soar. It did not aspire. It simply was a vertical filing cabinet, storage for humans during business hours. The Singer Building had been many things, most of them financially disastrous, but it had never been boring. Every surface had been designed to delight, to demonstrate that commerce could coexist with artistry. The mansard roof alone had been a gesture of architectural confidence, a declaration that beauty mattered even at heights only birds could appreciate. One Liberty Plaza made no such gestures. Its message was clear. Beauty was a luxury the modern world could not afford. Real estate developers cited One Liberty Plaza as proof that the Singer Building's demolition had been correct. Preservation advocates cited it as proof that something vital had been lost. Both were right. The building remains standing today, profitable, functional, anonymous. It has outlived the Singer Building by decades. It will likely outlive everyone who remembers what stood there before. But no one will mourn when it finally comes down. Chapter 11. The Regret That Changed the Law. The Singer Building's destruction did accomplish one thing its builders never intended. It terrified New York into protecting what remained. The loss crystallized in the public consciousness during the early 1970s, as the sterility of One Liberty Plaza became apparent, and as urban renewal projects across the city erased entire neighborhoods. New Yorkers began questioning whether progress always required destruction, whether everything old was automatically inferior to everything new. The Landmarks Preservation Commission, chastened by its failure to save the Singer Building, became more aggressive in designating structures for protection. Between 1970 and 1980, the Commission designated over 800 individual buildings and dozens of historic districts. The pace of designation increased every year. Legal challenges mounted immediately. Property owners argued that landmark designation constituted regulatory taking without compensation, that preventing demolition or alteration deprived them of economic use of their property. The constitutionality of preservation law remained uncertain until 1978, when the Supreme Court upheld New York's landmarks law in Penn Central Transportation Company versus City of New York. The decision established that historic preservation was a legitimate government interest that could restrict property rights without violating the Constitution. Buildings could be saved even when owners wanted to demolish them, even when demolition made financial sense, and even when preservation imposed economic costs. The ruling came 10 years too late for the Singer Building, but it ensured that future buildings of similar significance could not be destroyed by simple economic calculation. The Singer Building became a cautionary example cited in preservation advocacy nationwide. When developers proposed demolishing historic structures in Chicago, San Francisco, Boston, the local preservation communities invoked Singer's ghost. Look what New York lost. Let's learn from their mistake. Do not repeat it. Architectural education changed. Schools began teaching preservation alongside design, treating historic buildings as resources to protect rather than obstacles to remove. Students studied the Singer Building as a case study in what happens when short-term economics overrule long-term cultural value. The building's destruction also influenced how cities evaluated development proposals. Environmental review processes began considering impacts beyond traffic and air quality, including effects on historic character and architectural heritage. Developers could no longer simply claim that new buildings were automatically superior because they generated higher returns. Public attitudes shifted dramatically. Surveys conducted in the 1980s showed that over 70% of Americans supported preservation of historic buildings, even at the cost of limiting development. This represented a complete reversal from 1960s attitudes when old buildings were viewed as disposable. The change was partly aesthetic backlash against modernist architecture. Buildings like One Liberty Plaza had proven that efficiency without beauty created urban environments that people actively disliked. Cities filled with glass boxes felt sterile, inhuman, interchangeable. Preserving older buildings became a way of maintaining urban character and distinctiveness. But the change also reflected deeper cultural recognition that some things, once destroyed, could never be recreated. The craftsmanship in the Singer Building's terracotta ornament, the artistry in its carved limestone, the skill required to design and execute Beaux-Arts architecture at that scale, all of this belonged to a vanished era. Modern construction techniques could not replicate it at any price. What was lost forever. This realization transformed preservation from sentimental nostalgia into urgent necessity. New York created tax incentives for historic building rehabilitation. Federal programs provided grants for preservation projects. Architectural firms specializing in adaptive reuse became profitable businesses. The market began recognizing that old buildings could be economically viable if treated as unique assets rather than obsolete liabilities. None of this saved the Singer Building, but it saved hundreds of structures that would otherwise have followed the same path to demolition. The building's legacy is visible across New York today. The Woolworth Building stands protected. The Flatiron Building stands protected. Dozens of early skyscrapers that were economically obsolete by modern standards survived because preservation law and cultural values changed just enough, just in time. The Singer Building died so others could live. This is cold comfort, but it is something. Chapter 12. The Mathematics of Glory and Regret. If you measure the Singer Building by profit margins and rental income, its demolition made perfect sense, which is precisely why we still mourn it. The building's story is a tragedy of incompatible values. It was designed according to principles that prioritized symbolic height over functional efficiency. It was judged by standards that measured success solely in financial return. These two frameworks could not coexist. One had to prevail. Economics won, as economics usually does. The logic was irrefutable. A building that loses money every year cannot survive indefinitely. A property worth more as vacant land than as an income-producing asset will eventually be cleared. These are facts, not opinions. But facts do not exhaust truth. The Singer Building represented something that cannot be quantified on a balance sheet. The belief that architecture should aspire to more than function, and that buildings could embody ambition and artistry. That the skyline was not merely a graph of real estate values, but a collective statement about what a civilization valued. When Frederick Bourne commissioned Ernest Flagg to design the tallest building in the world, he was not making a rational investment decision. He was making a gesture. The building was a declaration that Singer Manufacturing Company had transcended mere commerce to achieve something approaching immortality. Height was proof of power. Beauty was proof of refinement. Together, they would create a monument that outlasted any individual life. For 60 years, the building succeeded in this purpose. It announced the company's presence to everyone who looked at the Manhattan skyline. It appeared in photographs, paintings, films, becoming inseparable from the city's identity. 3 generations of New Yorkers grew up with the Singer Tower as a permanent feature of their visual landscape. Then it was gone, erased in 30 months of jackhammers and acetylene torches, replaced by a building designed to be forgotten. The question the Singer Building's destruction poses is uncomfortable. In a world where everything must justify its existence through profit, what happens to beauty that serves no practical purpose? What space remains for monuments built purely for glory? The answer modern cities have reached is ambiguous. We preserve some buildings, usually after they have proven their cultural value by surviving long enough to become historic. We demolish others, usually before anyone realizes what will be lost. The decision depends on timing, legal frameworks, public awareness, political will, and pure chance. The Singer Building lost this lottery. It was demolished just as preservation consciousness was forming, just before the legal tools existed to save it, just when attitudes toward old buildings were shifting from dismissal to appreciation. A decade later, it would have been protected. A decade earlier, no one would have questioned its destruction. It fell into the gap between eras, between value systems, between versions of what cities should be. What remains today is a cautionary tale and a question. The Singer Building proved that buildings designed for glory without regard for economics will eventually face demolition. One Liberty Plaza proved that buildings designed for economics without regard for beauty will eventually face public contempt. The synthesis, if it exists, is a building that achieves both: height without sacrificing width, beauty without abandoning profit, monument without requiring subsidy. Modern architecture continues searching for this balance, occasionally finding it, more often falling short. The Singer Building stands as a reminder of what happens when the balance tips too far toward symbol over substance. But it also stands, in memory at least, as proof that the attempt itself has value. Better to build something glorious that fails than to build nothing glorious at all. The building that rose 612 feet to touch the sky and fell 60 years later to touch the earth again teaches us that ambition always carries risk, that beauty always costs something, and that the things we value most are often the things we cannot afford to keep. This is the mathematics of glory and regret. It balances perfectly, and it breaks your heart.